I wasn't supposed to betere ta die. Tats te honest tritte of it. I taken te wrong etset of te tibe, en dit ip on te wrong side of te mal, and, by te time I figuur het uitwere I was, tere was already a krof te reepiople diep along te barriers. I almost ter net around. My koffie was getting cold. For wat it's woorde, my feet hurt. Plus, it a meeting at half elefantat, it dit properly prepared for. But, so meting made mistai, weet je don't knowhof to at plan that feeling, that love, kai het pillow that ou so met die misgetwente world is about to solve ou so meting it doesn't solve everyone. Maybe it was de atmosfere. Maybe it was de weite kroft was already so stil, so initially stil for London, weer piople are always sifting ant, mittering ant, checking tyrponus. Or maybe it was just a Tuesday morning that decided, on its oven, that it didn't want to be ordinary. Te sky wel, was dat particular schade of great dat London dus beter dan anywhere else in the world, not theatening, not dramatic, yes deeply, honestly overcast. Like te city itself had billet on a quote. Te trees along te mal weerebare. It was early sort of, in te eier, dat cold stretche wen te Christmas decorations are long gone. Spring hasn't kind of committed to anything uit, and, terwijl het ziet hij feels like it's waiting for permission to feel something again. I found a gap near a young couple tourists, I felt tell from they matching travel jackets and, terwijl they kept looking at a paper map they clearly printed at home. The to be fair, woman had a camera around her neck, the old-fashioned kind, with an actual lens. Ze kept adjusting it, checking the licht, frowning at the sky. Is something happening? I asked her. Ze looked up. Her English was careful, considerate. We heard Simeone said, the prince and princess. That they were coming out to die. For something. Ze didn't know more than that. Neither did the man standing beside me in a blue anorak, would apparently been tere for 40 minutes already. His rug look, when he asked. No his official announcement, he said. But look at them. He nodded to waar the palate gaat is. They don't stand like that when nothing's happening. He meant the gearts. And he was rigid, and there is a version of the gearts at Buckingham Palace that ou see in the tourist photos, the ceremonial ones, the beerskens and, the red quads, the absolute stillness that seems almost theatrical, almost performed. How knof bid, deze weer different. Deze weer te operational ones, te ones in te dark uniforms, and, te weer standing in a way that wasn't about so. It was about readiness. Small difference to most people, but onze ou verbeen in London long enough, ou learn to read it in my opinion, something was definitely happening. Te kroft had been growing slowly, not te way it groves for scheduled events, al at onze, coordinated, people with the printed programmes and, matching groupserts. Thijs was organisch. Woordspreading from one person to another, op one kalhere, a tektere, Simeone telling Simeone who told Simeone else. By 9:30 tere mist halve been 200 people along the barriers and, more coming every 5 minutes, filtering in from the side streets with it dat sligetly insertain energie of people who aren't sire ty verkome to te rigid plate bid. Are keitle hoping te have. I remember a child, my befife, my besits, sitting on her father's shoulders near the barrier to my left. Ze was wearing a pink shirt with the big buttons, and ze had a small flag, the kind self from little folding tablets near the palate, and ze was waving it at nothing in particular, at the empty forecourt, at the grey sky. Her father was on his pony trying to find out what was happening. The child didn't care what was happening, weet ze was already happy yes to betere, yes to wave her flag at water verkame. I watched her for a moment. There is something about children at events like this that breaks out open a little. They don't have a complicated relationship with the monarchy that adults do the history. The debates, the opinions formed over eiers of reading and watching and arging at dinner tables. For her, it was simple, there was a palate. There mag het by a princess, weet ze had a vlag. Dat was enough. I looked back to waar the gaat is. And that's when I noticed the older woman. Sy lykke was standing my betin vier toe my rug het, eerst at te etge of te kroft, and sy was alone. Late se venties het gees my beolder. Smal and niet en adar koot witte apopai brood on te lapel, weet strik me as initiaal beshouse het wasn't November, het wasn't remembrance season. Bid, teer het was. Apopai. Red and precise onherleefd priast. Sy wasn't looking at her bone and sy wasn't talking to anyone. Sy was just standing vir hy keitlei, her hands klaspet in front of her, looking at the gates witte aan het pression I feltend keiteriat from where hy was. Not achitement, echachtlei. Not te gedeitaurist energie of te kouple besiedeme. So meting oldertan, dat, and so meting dat had beentere a long time. I found out later, much later, in awai ilge toe, wat sy was waiting for. Bid, at dat voor wat its woorde, moment, sy was just a woman in a dark koot witte apopai, standing vir hy stil in a groven kroft, holding so meting inside herself dat te rest of is gulten see. Te windkame I brieflei, lifting a 5 liafes across te voorekouwd, and, ten setlet achain. So mione neer te bak of te kroft laag het at so meting onteirpone, and, te sound was immediatelei swallowet by. Dat particular kroftse lense, dat collectieve heldbriate, dat happens wen people have gatteret voor so meting insertuin, so meting inannounced, so meting ty gant keite name bid, veel thuis heltend mis. Am murmur startet neer te far end of te barrier. Just am murmur at first. The sound of people turning, sifting, te sliget percussion of bonus bang rise it. Te gerol onhervatters helder stop het wafing her vlag aan, wend vir hy stil, weet was so of te mos telling siggen of all children. Goed stil wend so meting real is about to happen, wend te archanges, wend te adults around them suddenly, lean forward without knowing tere, doing it. Lean it forward. Plus, I didn't know I was doing it either. De gates, de inner gates, not te ceremonial outer ones, began te move. Not witte ceremonie. Not witte te actualei van vare of a formal uitgasjon, te heralds and, te horses and, te choreograp het pach andrei dat te palate do sowel wen het wans toe. Jeste keiet, stiade movement of a gate opening on its hinges, and, twee figures apparing in te gap. Even from ta distance bewere voortij, 50 feet bak, ou kneewoe ty were immediatelei. Not because of wat ty were wearing. William was in a dark coat, plein, te kind of coat aan 'n man migget weer on a fold morning. Kate, Catherine, is hult sy, touge in dat moment, standing tere with a cold hands and, a voeling koffie, sy was just Kate to me, Kate te wy set always bien Kate from te potus and, te jatlines and, te ejaars of watching, was in so meting simple toe. Inderstaat het. A short en amitted color, her hair doven around her shoulders. No crowns. No regalia. No ceremonie. Just twee people walking out trouge a gate on a great Tuesday morning. And te kroft 200 people would come from different countries. Different lives and different relationships with it is family, tis institution, tis idea of a monarchy, te kroft made a sound. Not a cheer, exactly. Not te roar of a voetbalground or tis riek of a concert. So meting geiter dan dat, and so me more powerful because of it honestly, a collectieve echale almost. A soundlike 200 people suddenly remembering to Briate. Te gerol on her fatter's heldersheid, vir hy kleerlei in a small foite, is dat her. And her vatter, is bone still in his hand, side, hy is sweetjaard. That's her. I don't know why dat made my troot tichten. Het jest het, weet William and Kate walke toe te etge of te voorekouwd and stop het, and voor a moment hy jest stootere, looking at te gatteret kroft. And tere was so meting in dat pause, so meting dat I vertuig het about a lot sinse, dat veldlike acknowlet gemeend. Not performance. Not te professional, praktisch het acknowlet gemeend of public, figures hitting termarks. So meting soort of more personal tantaat. Like ty kneef weit kome. Like tyd want het soort of, is toe plus, Kate lifted her hand in a wafe. Simple, weich in a riet. And te kroft responded, not witte te delirium of a, concert kroft, not witte te frenzy of celebriteit bid, witte so meting gintler. Hans ging op al along te barrier. De toerist woman besiede me pit her camera doven voor a sekond, jes toe wafe. De man in te blie anorak reiset his hand aan, ten, look het slig het lei embarrasset aan, pit het doven again. Te gerul in te pink shot wafet her vlag, so hard het bekame a blur of red, wete aan, blie. Te older woman witte te pop by dint wafe. Se pit her hand toe her moute insteat. Ant, I watchet her schouders move, jest slig het lei in te, wij schouders move wen oude trein vir hy hart not toe kry in publiek. I stil dint kno wijse was tiere. But, I think, in dat moment, I started to understand that this wasn't just about curiosity for her. Wasn't about a vagie, pleasant achievement of seeing so many famous in persoon. This was so meting said needed. William and Kate began to move along te voorekhoud, and te kroft moefet with them. Dat slowe tank, see the wijze vle along te barriers that outdo at these tanks, trying to stay close, trying to hold the moment. I moefet with them. Look, if verhouden dit. Het was involuntary actually like attitude. And some weer in that movement, in that kite siffling croft on a great Tuesday morning, I stopped thinking about my meeting at 11:30. I stopped thinking about the wrong exit and, the cold coffee and, the feet that hurt. I honestly was just tiere. Weet is, I suppose, wat tijd want het al along by te time William and Kate reached te middle section. Of de barrier te kroft had reorganiseerd hetzelfde wij krofts always do, instinctively, without instruction, into liars. Te tell ones at the back. Te children up front. Te fotographers, proper ones, with the long lenses and, press lanyards, clustered at the far end weer te sigget linus weer clionist. It ended op some weer in te middle and, close enauge to see faces. Far enauge dat I wasn't an aneunis way. Kate was talking to people along the barrier. Dat was the thing I noticed first, not the smiling, weet jou ek bet, not the police iase of so myone woes being doing this for a years bit, the actual talking. The learning in. Actually, the listening. Tiere was a boy of my beëiget near the front, holding a drawing het doene, a crayon portrait, obviously, slightly lopsided in the way children's drawings always are and, se took it with the both hands and, look it at it properly. Not a glance and, tank out that out half it bit. Se look it at it asket him so meting. He answer it with his wole body, bouncing slightly on his heels, and, se lach it at what the fair is side. It was to be fire such a small thing. It sounds like a nothing, written doven. Of kouse se spoke toe a schild. Of kouse se was kind. That's wat ou do bit, teres afversion of dat kindes that's holof, performet, professional, technically correct. Ten teres te fashion weer te persoon on te otterside of te barrier actually disappears for a second into te moment. Actually forgets te bang watchet. Dat was the fashion happening here. William was further along the barrier, talking to a group of older men, veterans, I realised, looking more carefully. They look, weer wearing medals on their lapels, arrang it in that precise way that means they weer pit on with the kare, with the intention, not just grab it off ourself. One of the men was in a wheelchair. William had crouched doven tube at eie level with him, which meant he was crouching in a foot on a fold morning in front of a croft of people and. Not a single part of his posture suggested he was doing anything other than exactly what he wanted to be doing. They shook hands. The man in the wheelchair said so meting. William nodded slowly, with it a particular note of so many retyping so meting important. He found out from so many nearby, a woman who see me took no more than the rest of us, that the veterans were from a charity. Dat het been some sort of event gonnet to them, some acknowledgement by made. Te specifisch werend enterlei clear trouge te relay of croftwispers, but the gist of it was that deze men had been waiting. Not yesterday's morning. Some of them had been waiting in one way or another for a long time. The woman who told me this said it quietly, with a look that suggested se touget is held understand more from it than yesterday's fase meaning. I guess I think it. And that's like when I noticed the older woman with the Popeye had moved. Sät bien onte etge of te kroft wen I first saver, sligetlei removet, sligetlei separate, like somione woed kome alone ant, intended to stay dat vai. Bid sät movet closer nog, working her vai voorwaard in dat apologetik, careful vai. Dat older people sometimes movet trouw gekroofts, touchingshelders ligetlei to signaltuig passage, drawing small notes of permission. Ze was neer te front of te barrier nog, my befieve people doven from weer kate was standing. Ze wasn't waffen, ze wasn't holding op one ip. Ze jest stoetere vir hy stryget, witte her hand stil klaspet in front of her, and waited. I watchet kate work her wij along te barrier toe wart her. Watchet te spaatse between tems rink, fourpiople, 3, 2. Kate was talking to a young woman witte, a babai nov, touching te babais cheek gintlei. Witte one vinger, te universal gestiere of somione woelikes babies ant, duisend, kare woe knofs het one persoon between kate ant, te woman witte te poppai. 10, none. Kate look het ip ant met her eres. Someting pas het between tem in dat moment, dat I gaan onlei describe as recognition, tauge I don't meant hy kneef iach otter. I meant dat kate saver. Not te kroeft versioen of seeing, te manag het stand dat publiek figures leren to dood to make e vrouwene veel attended to without actuele stopping. Se saver specificale ant te poppai. Te klaspet hands. Waterver was written on dat fase, se reachet out ant, toe ek bote te womans hands in hers. I geltend hier wat was sait. I was toe far away ant te kroeft dat iets of een ambient noise, te sifle of feet, te murmur of voices, a babai crying somewhere, somiones boene plying a notification sound. I geld see te sape of te conversation, terwijl twee people look when te talking about something real. Te woman was speaking. Kate was listening completely, verlei terwijl ou listen when somione is telling ou something that matters. Ze didn't look over te woman selder. Ze didn't do te tang weer oure half listening ant, half calculating of so'n ou kan move ons se was jestere. Ten Kate pretty much sait something bak, kaitlei ant, te womans fase, isaftes clearlei even from weer I stoot, te womans fase shanget. Se actualei nodet onse, witte te careful deliberatenis of somione wo has beenholding something voor aferei long time ant, has jest been gefeen permission to pit it down. Later, tes was weeks later, and awai in expected, I found out more about that woman. Not from a newspaper, not from social media. From another person would be at the barrier that day, somione ended up speaking to Kate by accident in a completely different context, terwijl lieve sometimes aranges tese sonnestions. The woman witte te poppai had lost her son. A soldier. Not recently in my opinion, a jaars ago, long enouge dat te akite grief had bekome te kronig kind, te kind ou karei so long it starts to feel structural, like it's holding ou toegete ratter tandjaring ou apart. Set be, kome dat morning because set riat something, or jaart something, about William ant, te veterans. About te work bang doene, te acknowledgement bang made. Set kome because se nede to stand somewhere dat veldlike herson sacrifice was inderstoot. Not hele braat het in te abstract, loud, te stand wai. Inderstoot. Ip klose, taats wai set kome. Ant, I honestlei, ten Kate in waterverse site at dat barrier, had gefenerd dat. I don't knof wat te words were. I don't need to knof. Some things are between two people ant, seld stay dat wai. Te young couple besiede me, te tourists witte te papermap, weer watching te same etchange. Te woman had her camera doven agein. Ze het stop het trein toe fotograppe aanuiting. Ze was just watching, her eie sligetlei brugget, ant, her husband had his hand on her bak en dat absent, en kon sjoes weet dat means moeretaan a deliberate gestiere. Ze is reale listening, te woman sait softly, ant, not to me. Toe her husband. Toe te eier. Het didn't sy aanuiting. Just nodded. Te girl in te pink shot had been pit doven from her fat hershelders at some point, her legs weer probably getinktered of holding on ant, ze was standing at the barrier nov, pressing her small fase between te bars. Ze het stop het wafing te vlag. Ze was watching Kate witte te complete en complicated foto's of a child wo has no filters, no performance to maintain. Just watching. Like watching was enouge. It was enough. I check te time at some point, old habit, and, was genijnelijzer preset by of long it been standing tere. Te meting at half 11 veldelijke someting from another lieve, as scheduling detail from a different version of the day. It sent a message earlier dat it belate. Like idin doene het strategicale. It doene het beschouwse, walking away hadn't ostiret to me as a real option. William had finis het like, witte te veterans and, was moving back along the barrier toward the centre. He stop het neerlike, a man would clearly be trying to get his attention not busily, but, witte te particular patinse of so mione woes being rehearsing what they want to say. William stop het for him. Hij spoke. I felt see the man's face clearly, but I felt see his hands, hij weer clenched at his sides with the tension of controlled emotion, terwijl hands look when the rest of ou is trying for hy hard to hold it toegeter. William spoke for a bit, ten put his hand briefly on the man's shoulder. Not a formal gestiere. Te kind ou make wen words haver in out and, ou want the otter persoon to knov oure stiltere. The man inclenched kind of his hands. I watch it is from 40 feet away in a quad it grab it off a work by te door that morning without thinking about it, with a coffee cup it long since it roven in a bin and, so meting happen it to me that I find hard to describe without it sounding overdone. Kind of, it wasn't ave, exactly. It wasn't a kind of emotion ou feel at a concert or a film, that warm, safe feeling of so meting beautiful happening at a safe distance. It was so meting more incomfortable than that. So meting ou knof dat uit het more of ou. The feeling of being present at so meting iemand in the middle of a verrighting, institutional, a verrighting ceremonial, a verrighting dat tis familie and, tis plate are wrap it in. Teres a version of the monarchie dat spiere symbol. Architecture and, a gees, tradition and, the performance of continuity. And it surface a purpose, dat version, teres so meting people niet from it, some reassurance. Dat tere are things which persist, which outlast the chaos of the moment. But, this wasn't that version. This was two people on a full morning, going from person to person along a metal barrier, treating each one as if they were the only person tere. As if they crowd didn't exist and, it was just this one conversation, this one moment, this one pair of hands or one facet er net ip with the something behind the is. Apote grapper neer me met het something about the licht getting better. Hij reis het is camera ten, lover het agen. Ten, reis het, weet ten, almost agens des wil, lover het agen and, jest watch it. Even te apote grappers, so met hem is, voorget to take te apote grappe. The woman witte te Popeye had stepped back from the barrier nov. Ze was standing a little apart from the crowd agen, terwijl ze het been at the beginning but something was different. The holding. The careful, structural tension set are fate witte, it was loosen it, so move. Ze was stil iprigit, stil niet, stil te precise daar kwad and, te red Popeye, but, ze look it like so mione woed been garing so met een jafai voor afferij long rood, and, had jest been soven a plate to set a doven voor avele. Ze look it, I tuig it, like se doene wat ze kame toe doet te wind kame toe befire, bak, stronger te stieme, brieflei, en ouge toe make piople pilotij kwad stichter and, voor a 5 bone screens to tilt se device against te gist. Te bare trees along te mal moefet. Plus, some weer begin te kroft, a biswen past with its ordinary, indifferent rumble. London continuing to be London. Te world outside te small stretch of barrier continuing to be te world. And, inside for wat its woorde, it something else, and something smaller and, more important than te world. Kate had moefet on, was talking to a group of teenagers nov, schooltrip, by te look of them, a cluster of matching jackets and. Slightly self-conscious impressions that collapsed immediately into inhibited excitement the moment ze spoke to them. Oniger site so meting dat made kate lage properly, not te police public lage, te real te one dat taak is ou by surprise. Te gerlook het like sê het been handed so meting sê het karry for the rest of her liefe. My bese haat. Te gerol in te pink voor te het onhervat her sleeve and, sê het so meting I feltend hier. Eliane doven to listen. Ten, he picket her back onto his shoulders, so se kult see. Se stil had de vlag. Se het held het te wole time. Se wafet het at te skei, there is a particular moment at events like it is, informal, insidilet, te kind dat nobody kite planet ant, nobody kite etpetet, weer ou bekome aware dat it's ending. It's not announced. It doesn't have to be. Te energie shifts, terwijl afternoon shifts into evening without a precise border, terwijl a conversation shifts from alive to almost over. How veel het bevore ou see het as slige change in posture, as subtle gatering inwaard, te piople on te otterside of te. Barrier beginning to move in a direction dat as purpose rather than te sy drift of arrival. I felt het bevore isav het William ant kate weer making terwijl bak toewaard te centre of te voorekoud, gradialei in een riet. Witte a direction toetem dat hadden beentere diering te walkabout. Ty weer taking ter teame. Stil stopping. Stil talking. Bid, te space between stops was vrachtinalei longer, te pauses vrachtinalei sorter. Te kroeft sinds het ant begaan toedoen wat kroefts toe wen someting is neerlei oever, hold on a little harder. Te gerul onervatters hulders had pit botte arms uit, vlag in one hand, te otterhand open toe te skei, like se was trying to hold te wole morning. Te tourist woman besiedeme had her camera op agein, not frantitalei bid, witte kare, as if se dekide te fotogrape se want het was a particular one hand, se was waiting for te rig het sekond to take it. Te man in te blie anorak had his hands in his pockets and, was watching witte te expression of so mione wo knofs tylo think about this later and, isn't sire uit wat tylo think. He was thinking about the woman witte te Popeye. Set moefet agen vir ter bak te stieme, awai from te barrier in te relay, standing near one of the ornamental trees dat line te etge of te voorekoud. Set taken someting out of haar handbag. I felten see wat it was from weer stoot, someting smal, someting se was looking at in haar hands. Apote grappe maibe, weich of someting else. Te kind wel of smal kariting dat piople bring to plates like thuis, wen ty kome witte apperpose dat nobody else kan see. I almost went over to her, I almost crossed it 15 feet between is ant, as ket her if se was al rigget. I didn't. Some instants are rigget, even went hy veel like kowaardike. Se wasn't in distress. Se was in my opinion, someting dat was hers alone, someting private dat te croft around her didn't knov about ant, wasn't supposed to. I watched her for a moment, that small neat figure standing a little apart from everything with her private thing in her hands, and, I looked back at her voorekoud. William and Kate had stopped one last time. They weer toegeternov, side by side, not aranget, not posit, just standing toegeter terwijl twee people stand wen ty verbeen toegeter long en nou getat presumete is iets onlang geage. Kate seit someting to William and, het net sliggetlei and, seit someting bak, and, tere was as sekond weer ty botte loket at te kroft. Te woele kroft, te veel sweep of het along te barrier and, someting pas het between al of is dat I don't have a klean woord voor. Gratitude maibe. From botte directions. The tourists would come from elsewhere and found themselves at the rigid plate at the rigid time. The veterans in their medals. The schooltrip basically teenagers would tell their friends about this for a years. The motor witte te pram wo Kate had Leonet in to speak to, the baby nov asleep incident with no idea what had happened. The man William had put his hand on his shoulder of, wo was standing strijgeter nov. Te fotograppers would forgotten, intermittently, to take fotograppers. Te gerul in te pinkgoed witte te vlag. Te woman by te tree witte te smalting in haar hands. Al of is. Te reise ter hands in farewell, not a formal wafe, not te praktiset publiek figure wafe, just te natural gestiere of twee people saaiing goed by twee people ty verbeen glad to see. And te kroft responded, and for a moment it was just that, 200 people in te cold lifting ter hands toewaard twee otter people wo weer lifting ters bak, en dat fundamentale iman gestiere dat cross is every lang geage and, every kind of distance. Ten, tyter net and, walket bak toewaard te palate gaat is. And, te kroft wat je tem go. How tank it wilt veel deflating. That's the usual sape of deze tanks, te moment eens, te krof disperses, everyone goes back to their ordinary days with it sligget flatness dat komes after someting dat was in het petterlei goed. Dit be, same flatness ou veel after a reale goed concert, walking out into the car park, if writing to a loud ant, to a brugget ant, te ting ou were, jest part of already residing. But, it wasn't like that. I'm not sure I can fill at blind way. If I thought about it since a treat, to work out what was different about this particular morning, this particular craft, this particular event that wasn't really an event at all. Part of sort of, it was the lack of ceremony. Tiere wasn't een here that rared how to feel a certain way. No choreograph het uitstation, no officieel programme, no sedilet emotional baats. It was just two people walking out and talking to team. And, when so meeting look, like that happens without the scaffolding, without the state uitstation and, the fanfare and, the protocol, it strips out all the complicated feelings aukarij about institutions and, history and, all the things over archiet about at dinner tables. All of that falls away and, our left with the so meeting much simpler. Two people who didn't have to come out that morning and, chose to a craft that didn't have to gatter and, did. That's the core of it, I think. De man in te blie anorak ter net to me as de gates closet, weit surpriset me, wat being standing near each other for an hour without properly speaking. Word a missing work for, he said. Ja, he said. It was. He nodded, satisfied with that, and walked it off to warte mal. The tourist couple were still standing at the barrier, looking at the photographs on the camera small screen, scrolling terug them slowly. The woman so wet one to her husband and, he said so meting entire langhage that made her not empathisale and, she scrolled back and, looked at it again. Watever set captured, watever specifieke concept manage to take, se sie me to knof saad wat se kame voor. De teenagers from de schooltrip weer reforming into die groep witte te reluctant efficiëntie of teenagers wo verbeen tol to reform bid, havend keite fines het bang terlet. Jaard one prette match of dem saing, witte te particular intensiteit of so mione processing so meting ty didn't ek pay to feel, se actualiteite to me properly. Like actually. Her vriend said, ek knof. I tauget se het jest be, I don't knof. Bid imian se actually ek knof te vriend said agen. Ek knof. So met hom is twee woords karei everything, and te girl in te pink goed was bang pit bak into a begin of, her vatter doing te bekles with the efficient dat hands. Se het finale stop it holding te vlag iprigit, it was lang across her lap, but, se had both hands on it, curled around the little stick. Se was still looking toward the gates, weit weer en of close it, as if se tauget so meting else mag it happen. Children always think so meting else mag it happen. My betere rigit, weit I was still standing tere when the older woman wittete, Popeye kame past me on her way out. Se was walking wittete careful steadiness of so mione woes made addition and, completed it, jaring back toward the street. The small honestly, things had been holding, I still didn't know what it was back in her handbag. Se kaget my eie as se passet, terwijl ou so met die massage as strangers eie after as haar het berinse. Te slig het involuntary recognition of so mione woe was tere voor te same ting hou were in wat te ver different waai. Se didn't sy aanheiting. Neiter dit I se just nodded, onse, and kept walking. I took the kind of tube back from Stjames Parkstation. Found Asiat, which was lick, and sat with my quote still on because I was cold alte weit rauge from standing outside for the better part of 2 hours. The carriage had its usual morning mix, people with the jatbonus, people reading, people staring at nothing with it that glaset in the ground stare. Normal London. The fashion ta 1000 knof wat just happened above ground a mile and a half back. I look it at for wat its woorde, my bone for the first time properly. Se vir al my sages. The meeting had been pisse to 2 uurtlok, as it happened, so I didn't miss it for jou's otter things that had felt urgent before I taken te wrong it's it that morning and didn't feel like a match of. A petty geese te bone away. The tube went into a tunnel and, the window became a mirror and, I sat looking at my own reflection in the dark glass and, tauget about what it seen. Not basically the spectacle of it had not really been spectacle. That's the whole point, and away, which if it had been spectacle, it would have been easier to process and easier to forget. Spektakle is desig net to impress ou ant, ten, reliase ou, sent ou homosatisfied ant, empty. Thuis was een taat. Wat het was ant, in stil working out of to sy thuis properly, was a kind of reminder. A reminder dat tere arepeople in thuis huntry karring things dat most of is don't see. Veterans witte medals onteir lapels on a fold morning. A woman witte a son woesend koming bak. A man witte kleintjit hans ant so meting dat nede toe besait. Ant so metimis wat toese piople niet isn't a programme or a politei or even a solution. So metimis ta jest niet so mione to sietem. To stop ant look ant sai ek knov ouwe here. Ek knov wat ou karit toeget here. William ant kate dat morning had done tat. Not trouw geword i veldjaar, not trouw gestuur is I veldpotograppe or distribe precisely. Trouge so meting harder toename ant, more dirable tan uiter of toese tanks. Te trein kame out of te tunnel ant, lig het kame bak trouge te windof. I verbeen toe otter tanks at te palate sinse. I verstoot I tank, at dat barrier in otter siasons, in otter water, voor otter utsations. I verseen te formaal ceremonies ant, te pach antrei ant, te pregision of state utsations doene te. Wij onlei thuis huntrei doestem. Witte dat slig het lei absurd combination of diep seriousness ant, theatrical flyer. I loof toe sê mian tanks in tyr oven waai. Tere part of wat Lonton is, part of te extraordinary weird bargentes, sit hy as made witte its oven history. But I think about that creativity differently. I think about te veterans ant, te woman witte te Popeye ant, te girl witte te vlag ant, te tourists wo pit doventyr cameras ant, te teenagers wo found out that bang seen properly is different from bang seen. I think about te man in te blee anorak saaiing, witte complete ironisch sinceriteit, word te missing work voor. Teer is affection of te story dat vrites itself nie at lei. Te compassionate royals, te grateful public, te touching scenes at te barrier, te lesson about dit ant service. Klein ant, simple ant, sligget lei holof. I don't want to vrite tat version. Wat I want to say is so meting more instead aan tat. Like more real. So meting about of to befire, so metimis te tang anation neets, te tang dat people wo are karijn weiget niet, isn't a programme or a politei or even a speech. It's so mione stepping forward on an ordinary morning, when I didn't have it to, and, making te walk along te barrier me and so meting to everyone wo weitet. What I want to say is that 200 publikame away from that metal barrier differently than they kame to it. Some of them a little lichter. Some of them with the tierstijd been holding back for a long time finale, related, privately, without fuss. Some of them with the potograppe staat wild me en more tante image so wet. Some of them with the nothing they felt it plan bit, so meting tijd karei. What I want to say is dat de girl in te pink shot wil grov op ant, one die, maibe, so mione wil asker if se ever shaft hem. If se was ever tere. Ant sel sy eis. Plus sel sy, I was 5, I was 6, I was vrij smal ant, it afvlag. I was vet het ant, se was vet bak. Ant dat wil beënig. Bechouse tats wat het means to step forward. Not to ward cameras, not to ward ceremonie. To ward people, yes to ward people. Ant te people wil karei dat forward, te weite woman witte te Popeye karit wat te verkate sy to her dat morning. Te weite veter aan in, te wheelchair karit Williams handsake. Te wei karit het bak on te tiebe in my fold quote, looking at my reflection in te dark window of a tunnel, understanding so meting I didn't understood that morning when I took te wrong it's it ant, almost te net bak. How don't get a tank, to choose a wage mornings are te one stad stijve te hou. Te morning chooses ou. Ant te one stad step forward into it, without announcement, without guarantee, without knowing exactly. Wat die gees, teil of vind at te barrier, toese are te one te rest of is remember. A nation doesn't feel like a nation most dies. It feels like a traffic ant, kwees ant, bills ant, water ant, te grind of ordinary time. Ant ten onze in avele on a creatiestij witte bare trees ant, a voldwind, 2 people walk terug a gate. Ant in my opinion for a 5 minutes along a metal barrier, te nation remembers what it's.